The first thing I tasted was smoke, not the thin, chemical haze of a city fire alarm, but the thick, choking soot of old timber burning, the kind that clings to your tongue and drips down your throat like tar. When I pushed myself up, my palms rasped on damp stone. The corridor around me was narrow, lit by torches that hissed and spat. The air smelled like sweat, iron, and fear. No velvet ropes, no exit signs, no gift shop this way. My brain tried to file it under theme park, film set, immersive theater. Then my shoes bit my feet leather, stiff, nothing like sneakers, and the torchlight jittered on arrow-slit windows. Somewhere close, a boy cried. The sound pinged along the stone like a dropped coin. I turned the corner into a small chamber. Two boys huddled on straw mats. The older, -1 or 13, sat upright as if his spine had been forged. His arms circled the younger, whose face was buried against his brother's shoulder. Their clothes were fine, soaked dulled by dust, colors frayed from anxious fingers. The older boy lifted his head. His eyes were gray-blue, like rainwater with a storm brewing underneath. "Who are you?" he asked. The command in it fought with the trembling. History class hit me in the chest like a misfired seatbelt. Two boys, the tower, vanished, and me standing inside their story. "John," I said. It wasn't my name. It was the first thing that came. The younger boy peered up. His cheeks were blotchy. "Are you a guard?" "No," I said. "I'm here to help." That was reckless. It was also the only thing I knew. The older boy's fingers tightened on his brother's sleeve. "I am Edward," he said, and swallowed. "My brother is Richard." And the corridor seemed to tilt, as if the whole castle had just inhaled. The older boy's name sat heavy in the air. Edward, not just Edward, but the boy who was and wasn't a king, depending on which mouth you asked. Beside him, Richard washed, knee with the anxious courage of someone who intends to be brave and is practicing out loud. "You are not one of the tower men?" Edward said. "Not a question. I'm temporary," I answered. "Sent to keep you company." The lie wobbled but refused to fall. Richard tipped his head, studying my clothes the way a cat studies a guest. Then, in a burst of decision, he scooted to sit the way Edward sat, back straight, hands folded, chin lifted a fraction. The imitation was imperfect and earnest. Edward noticed and, without looking, relaxed one shoulder. Richard copied that too, as if ease could be taught like posture. "Company," Richard repeated, like a tutor or a jester. "Closer to a babysitter," I said, and immediately regretted the century gap. He tested the strange word with his tongue and decided to own it. The chamber had been made neat in the way prisons are neat. Swept straw, a small table, a stool that no one had chosen. No toys, no books, no color. The window slit admitted a strip of sky the shade of watered milk. "Have you seen the garden?" Richard asked suddenly. "With the roses? We walked there once." He held his fingers apart to show the size of a remembered bloom, and then, almost shyly, drew the imaginary petals inward again. "Will we go again?" "Yes," Edward said. "Too fast." I let the lie sit a beat, then softened it. "When the weather agrees," I said. "Some days the sky remembers kindness." Richard brightened, then looked guiltily at his brother, as if happiness required permission. Edward's mouth almost curved. He caught it quick, folding the expression away like contraband. He turned back to me. "What do you know of the city?" "Noise," I said. "Bells and carts and arguments about the price of peaches. A fiddler who believes practice is something you do to other people." That earned Richard a grin and Edward a not-quite smile. "Uncle will set matters right," Edward added, carefully. "We will return too." He stopped before the word home, as if it had grown teeth. I nodded as if the future could be negotiated. History hung behind my ribs like a fluorescent light nobody ever fixed. "Princes in the tower." The phrase came with a chill you couldn't blame on stone. Richard fidgeted with a loose thread in his sleeve. Then, as if remembering a lesson, tucked my hand into his for one sober second. "If we must be brave," he said, "will you show us how?" Edward's eyes flicked to our joined hands. Something old and tender moved there and didn't break. "We will show each other," he said. We passed the hour with small things that pretended to be large. How to fold a napkin into a bird mine looked like a tired cabbage. How to count guard steps by the weight of their boots. How to listen to a door the way you listen to weather. I found myself translating the present for them, as if it were a foreign film, explaining without explaining, turning fear into instructions. When Thomas came with water, Richard sat taller, performing bravery for an audience of one. Thomas's gaze slid over us and back again. A man measuring risk against rumor. He left without comment. The key made its tired music in the lock. After dusk we lay on straw and traded the oldest human currency. What if the river ran backward for one day? What if a rope could be braided from clouds? What if kings were allowed to be children until they wanted otherwise? Edward said little. When he did, he spoke like a boy testing the hinges on a door he might have to close. At some point Richard drifted against him, asleep mid-question. Edward adjusted the blanket with a tenderness that made my chest ache. In a place office life had left dusty. You speak strangely, he said at last, eyes on the dark, like a clerk who has read too many books and not enough people. In my world, I said, people argue in public and call it learning. We write to each other across wires. We are always reaching and seldom touching. He considered that with a gravity that would have looked pompous on anyone older. Then teach me how to reach without being seen. First lesson, I said, breathe when others hold their breath. Second, name the fear. The third is just keep your brother warm. He nodded. Once, something settled between us, small and real as a coin. Later, when their breathing evened, I sat awake with stone at my back and the past at my throat. There are moments you can point to and say, that's when the story decided what it wanted. This was one of them. 2 boys, one oath not yet spoken, and a stranger pretending competence in a room too small for all our futures. Outside, the tower kept its own quiet. Inside, a prince slept with his hand still curled around his brother's sleeve. If history insisted on losing them, it would have to go through me. It already was. Morning arrived without ceremony. Boots changed rhythm in the corridor, brisk, dragging, or heavy with authority. I learned them by sound alone. The tower trained you that way. A guard with a limp brought water and bread. His freckled face seemed built for apologies, though none left his mouth. Thomas, he said when I asked, as if the name cost him something. He set the jug down carefully, then left us to the silence. The chamber had become routine. Scraps of food, whispers of hope, but patterns matter. Walking the corridor with the empty jug, I noticed one door set uneven in its frame, a thin gap along the hinge. It exhaled a thread of cold air that tasted faintly of river. I didn't push then, but I marked it. Some doors are more than doors. Back with the princes, Edward tried to teach Richard how to fold a square of cloth into a bird. The creature collapsed into a wrinkled lump, and Richard laughed harder than the joke deserved. Edward forced a smile, but when his brother wasn't looking, his eyes returned to the door as if he, too, felt its breath. That evening Thomas lingered a heartbeat longer than usual. The city's noisy today, he muttered, gaze fixed on the jog. Peaches at the market, bells quarreling with each other, a fiddler who doesn't know mercy. Richard listened. Why died? Edward inclined his head, as though such scraps of description were a king's due. When Thomas turned to go, I followed him into the corridor. You're not one of us, he said quietly. No, I admitted, but you're not one of them either. His eyes flicked to the uneven door, then back. If a man were fool enough to test his luck, he would wait for rain. Rain hides many things. Then I'll pray for it, I said. He almost smiled. Pray softly. That night I checked the door. The latch groaned but lifted, revealing a stair curling downward. Air from below was colder, salted with the river's promise. I didn't go only far enough to know it was real. Back in the chamber, Edward and Richard sat upright, waiting. You went, Richard whispered, half awe, half reproach. I looked, I said. Looking is the rehearsal for leaving. Edward's gaze hardened into decision. We'll need more than courage. We'll need the weather. Then, I told him, let's hope the sky is on our side. For the first time in days, the silence of the tower felt like it was listening. Rain made the tower a softer jailer. Footsteps blurred, voices muffled, lanterns dulled to yellow smears. By the second watch the guards were singing, loud and tuneless, their ale-heavy voices covering other sounds. Edward gave a single nod. Richard squeezed my hand. I pushed the misfit door. It yielded with the same reluctant sigh as before. We crept down the spiral stair. The latch at the river door lifted under my knife. Easier than last time. Cold air rushed in. Water, fog, escape. A boat knocked gently against the quay, as if it, too, wanted out. Edward went first, Richard after him. I followed, steadying the hull. Thomas was already at the oar, his face half hidden by rain. Quick, he hissed, for a few strokes. The river accepted us. The tower shrank into mist. My chest almost believed. Then came the shout. A lantern flared on the wall above. Arrows hissed into the water. One struck the prow with a crack. Another skidded past my ear. Richard flattened himself against the boards. Whimpers swallowed by the storm. Row, Edward urged, his voice breaking. Thomas pulled harder, but the current fought back. A rope dropped from the wall, heavy and sure. It snagged the prow, jerking us sideways. More voices, more lights. Thomas swore. They've seen. We pulled, struggled, prayed. It didn't matter. The tower had decided. Guards hauled us back like fish too foolish to stay hidden. Richard clutched Edward. Edward stared up at the figures above, silent, furious, already aware of what history would say. The boat slammed against the quay. Rough hands seized us, dragging us out, water streaming from our clothes. Lantern light painted the stone gold and cruel. Thomas met my eyes once, apology carved into his face. Then the bearded guard stepped forward, grinning. Not this night, he said. The tower had won its first verdict. They shoved us back into the chamber, dripping and bruised. The door slammed, straw stuck to our clothes. Silence was heavier than chains. Richard clung to Edward, trembling so hard his teeth chattered. Edward held still, jaw clenched, eyes storm dark. I sat across from them, rope burns raw on my wrists, wondering how long we had left before failure stopped being rehearsals and became the ending. A stub of candle lay on the table. Thomas must have smuggled it in with the bread. Edward lit it, shielding the flame with his hand. The light carved three faces out of the dark, fragile as truth. We cannot wait for mercy, Edward said. His voice was too calm for his age. Not from guards, nor priests, nor God, only from each other. Richard's eyes were wide, shining in the candle's tremor. If we try again, will it be worse? Yes, I said. Honesty costs less than false hope, but worse doesn't mean impossible. Edward lifted the candle between us, then swore, no matter what comes, whether we walk free or vanish, we do not abandon one another. The wax dripped, hot and sharp against my skin as I touched the flame's glow. Memories blindsided me. Being 10 years old, in a bedroom plastered with band posters, swearing with a best friend that we'd never grow apart. That oath had collapsed under exams and distance. This one had teeth. I swear, I said. Richard pressed his small hand over mine and Edward's. I swear too, he whispered, voice shaking but certain. Edward blew the candle out. Darkness reclaimed the room, thicker than before. But the warmth of their hands lingered. I leaned back against the stone and thought of all the oaths people make in my century. Loyalty posted in comment sections, vows exchanged over bad Wi-Fi, promises that vanish with a swipe. Those were smoke. This was fire. And for the first time, I wondered if being trapped here meant I was finally in a story that mattered. The rain returned, heavier, as if the sky wanted to cover for us. By midnight, the guards were singing again, bold and careless. Edward nodded. Richard clutched the rope I had braided from stolen linen. We moved. The misfit door gave way. The stair coiled down. The latch at the river door lifted. Cold air rushed in. Our second chance. The boat waited. Thomas was already there, his face pale in the lantern glow. "Quick," he urged. We climbed in. For 5 strokes the river carried us. The tower blurred behind mist. Richard almost laughed, clutching Edward's sleeve. I felt my chest open for the first time in days. Then a shout cut the night. Lanterns flared on the wall. Arrows hissed. One struck the prow. Another sliced the air beside me. Richard dropped flat against the boards. Whimper muffled by rain.com. "Row," Edward commanded. Thomas pulled harder, but the current shoved back. A weighted rope crashed across the boat, sagging the prow. Guards hauled. We jerked sideways, closer to the wall. More voices, more lights. Edward's eyes met mine. He didn't speak, didn't need to. We both knew the river wouldn't save us. "Push," I shouted anyway, heaving against the line. My palms burned. The rope held. Above us, the bearded guard leaned over, grinning like a man cashing in a debt. Thomas faltered. "You're slipping." Edward stayed rigid, jaw set, fury locked behind his face. Richard sobbed opally now, clutching his brother as the boat scraped back against the quay. Rough hands seized us. Lanterns painted everything gold and merciless. The tower had caught us again. For one suspended breath I wanted to believe history was wrong, that this wasn't the night it swallowed them whole. But Edward's steady gaze told me otherwise. Hope had been real. That was the cruelty of it. They threw us back into the chamber, soaked and shaking. The door shut with a final thud. Richard pressed into Edward's side, his small body trembling with the aftershocks of fear. Edward wrapped an arm around him, but his eyes were fixed on me. "Someone told them," he said flatly. I swallowed. "Maybe they just—" "No." His voice was sharp as steel. "They knew. They waited." Richard's muffled voice rose from his brother's shoulder. "It wasn't Thomas, was it?" Silence stretched too long. I wanted to defend Thomas, to believe he hadn't sold us out. But I remembered the way his courage had cracked when the rope bit the boat, the way he had dropped the oar, the way he had looked at me with apology already carved into his face. And yet, what if it hadn't been him? The kitchen workers fell silent whenever I entered now. Words swallowed mid-sentence. Once, I heard my own name hissed in the corridor, then cut short when Boots approached. Even I had wondered if I'd spoken too freely, describing the garden, mentioning the uneven door where ears might have listened. The tower was made for suspicion. It fed on it. Edward's gaze didn't waver. "Trust is thinner than this air." The room itself seemed to listen. Water dripped in the corner like a clock with no mercy. Outside, Boots scraped, stopped, scraped again, as if someone paused to listen at our door. Richard clung tighter. "Will they kill us?" Edward answered, his voice as steady as a blade. "Not yet. They will wait. Waiting makes it look like judgment, not murder." I pressed my palms into the straw, my head buzzing with the absurd memory of an office I'd once worked in, where betrayal was just colleagues stealing each other's projects. Here, betrayal had teeth, and the bite would leave no survivors. Edward leaned forward, shadows cutting his young face into angles too harsh for childhood. "John, if you were sent here to change fate, hurry. Fate already has our names." The board appeared one morning, delivered by a guard with no expression. A square of wood, scarred and uneven, with pieces that looked borrowed from different sets. It wasn't mercy. It was mockery. Edward examined it like a summons. Richard's eyes lit with a rare spark. He tugged at my sleeve. "Will you play?" Edward was already setting pieces. "I will." His tone said the matter wasn't up for debate. We sat at the table. The board between us was too small, too fragile, and yet it felt heavier than any crown. The game began. The scrape of pieces against wood filled the silence. Richard crouched beside me, watching with the intensity of a boy convinced the outcome might rewrite the world. "You play well," I said after losing a night too easily. "Father taught me," Edward replied. "A king must see further than others." I nudged a pawn forward. "And what happens when the board flips over?" He met my eyes, gray and steady. "Then you play the floor as if it were still a board." Richard giggled. "That's cheating." Edward almost smiled. "No, that's surviving. We played on. I sacrificed pawns recklessly, sick of protecting pieces destined to fall. Edward countered with patience, always calculating, as though he could will the future into checkmate. You believe we are already lost, he said after a long silence. I stared at the board. I believe history prefers neat endings. Disappearances are tidy. Then let us be untidy. He advanced his bishop, slicing through my defenses. Richard clapped softly. Good move. Then he leaned closer to me. Don't let him win too fast. Thanks, I muttered. No pressure. Edward's queen slid across the board. Check. I looked at my king, cornered but technically alive. If I sacrificed everything else, it could limp another turn. Survival without dignity. Instead, I tipped the king over. The piece fell with a quiet knock. You gave up, Richard exclaimed. No, Edward corrected, lifting the piece back upright. He refused humiliation. The words sat between us, heavier than the board itself. Richard fell silent, eyes darting between his brother's stern calm and my tired half-smile. Outside, Boots passed in the corridor. Inside, the candle burned low, throwing our shadows across the wall. For a moment, it looked like three figures sitting at a board that was too small for the war we were playing. We weren't playing to win. We were playing to make sure losing left a scar. The footsteps came late, not the usual shuffle of board guards, not Thomas's drag boot rhythm, not the stagger of men with ale in their lungs. These were measured, heavy, final, boots that carried orders instead of bodies. The door creaked open, not slammed, not hurried. Two men entered. Their faces were bland, forgettable, the kind of faces history never bothers to describe. One held a strip of cloth, the other carried nothing at all. Come, said the empty-handed one. His tone wasn't cruel. That made it worse. Richard whimpered. Edward rose at once, pulling his brother with him. His voice was steady, though his shoulders looked carved from fear. We are ready. I stepped forward too, wrist sore, heart hammering. The guard's eyes skimmed me the way you skim clutter on a desk. Present but irrelevant. Not you, he said. Then take me first, I snapped. You want silence. I'm louder than they'll ever be. The man's gaze flicked over me. Bored. No requests, he said. The cloth came toward me. Not for my mouth. My eyes? Darkness slammed down, sour with lie and old sweat. Hands gripped my shoulders, steering me out. Stone corridors turned. Down then up, left then right. I counted steps, because counting was the only weapon left to me. 12, 20, 35. The air grew cooler, tasting faintly of river. Somewhere water gurgled like a drunk remembering a song. Then halt. Knees forced me down. Stone kissed bone. Silence pressed close. I braced for a blow that never came. Instead, voices murmured, blurred by cloth and echo. A prayer. An order, a verdict, and then nothing. Hands yanked me back up, turned me around, marched me again. The cloth peeled off at last. I blinked into a cell smaller than any room I'd known, barely wider than my outstretched arms. No straw, no candle, just stone, wet and waiting. The door shut. I pressed my head to the wall, listened. For a while there were sounds. The scrape of boots, a muffled cry that might have been Richard, a sharper tone that could have been Edward refusing to bend. Then silence. History doesn't shout. It erases in whispers. I sat there for what could have been hours or years. My mind betrayed me with images. A museum plaque, a glass case, words like the princes were never seen again. And me, absent even from the footnote. I thought of office corridors, of colleagues debating pizza toppings, of phones buzzing with trivial emergencies. I thought of how ordinary life is, until it isn't. At last the silence thickened into certainty. They hadn't come back. They wouldn't. I whispered their names. Edward, Richard, like passwords to a lock system. The stone absorbed them without reply. That was the night history closed its door. And one, for reasons I couldn't name, was left outside it. They came for me when the world had forgotten to keep time. No bell, no torch, just the scrape of a key and the door yawning open like a mouth. Out a voice said, I stumbled into a corridor that felt more shadow than stone. 2 guards flanked me, faceless in the dark. Their grips were firm but not brutal, as if violence was no longer necessary. Violence had already been done elsewhere. We moved through stairwells that twisted like intestines, through passages that smelled of mildew and old iron. At last we emerged into the yard. Fog smothered everything. The tower's walls loomed but seemed less like stone than memory. The air was damp wool against my skin. A small boat waited at the quay. Thomas stood by it. His shoulders looked narrower, his eyes older, like months had passed in a single night. He didn't meet my gaze. "In," one guard ordered. I obeyed, because refusal was just a slower way of drowning. Thomas pushed us off. The oars bit water with soft, defeated sounds. The tower receded into whiteness, its outline devoured. I leaned forward. "Where are they?" My voice was sandpaper. Thomas's jaw worked. "Gone." "Gone where?" His eyes flicked toward the fog, then back to the oarlocks, where all stories go when men decide they've heard enough. The current tugged us along. Behind, the tower faded until it was no more than a rumor. Ahead, London blurred into smoke and silence. The river tasted of secrets. I gripped the boat's side, nails biting wetwood. My mind screamed, "This is it. This is the night." The footnote had just been written, and I was scribbled in its margin. We passed under a bridge. A bell tolled somewhere unseen. Each strike felt like a nail hammered into a coffin whose occupants had already been erased. Thomas paused, rowing. His hands shook. "You'll leave here," he said hoarsely. "They think you did already. Take that gift and vanish." "I can't," I said. "Not with them. They're already history," he snapped, then lowered his voice. "If you try to drag them back, you'll only drown with them. Better to haunt the silence than be swallowed by it." I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat frozen, the fog closing in, my breath a ghost I couldn't control. The boat nudged a muddy bank. Thomas thrust a small bundle into my hands. Bread, a knife, coins that looked too heavy for their size. "Go," he said. His eyes finally met mine. "Be kind by surviving." I stepped ashore. My boots sank into the wet earth. When I looked back, the boat was already a smear in the fog. Then nothing. London spread ahead, dim and indifferent. Behind me, the Tower of London swallowed its secret whole. History would write only this. In 1483, the princes were seen no more. As for me, well, I was never meant to be written at all. The room smelled of polish and climate control. Glass cases glowed under white light, their labels neat, fonts chosen to look impartial. Tour groups drifted by in clumps, murmuring as if mystery could be consumed like coffee. On the wall hung the plaque, "The Princes in the Tower." Edward and his brother Richard, Duke of York, disappeared from the Tower of London in 1483. Their fate remains unknown. 2 sentences. That was all the world had kept. Inside a nearby case, a pair of tiny leather shoes, replicas of what royal children might have worn. Beside them, a tarnished crown fragment, jagged as broken teeth. Another case displayed a staircase diagram, marked with a black dot where bones had been found centuries later. "Possibly the princes," the caption said. "Possibly." I stared at the glass until my own reflection overlapped with the artifacts. For a heartbeat I saw more than myself. Stone gray eyes, a boy's hand clinging to a brother's sleeve. "Sad," a woman beside me murmured. Then, to her partner, "Do you want to grab lunch? Or wait until after the gift shop?" Behind them, a teenager pointed at the case. "Maybe they just ran away," he said, half joking. His friend laughed. The words struck like arrows. I tasted rain, heard oars straining against a current that didn't care, felt Richard's small hand pressed into mine, Edward's steady gaze in the dark. I pressed my palm to the glass, cool and yielding. The names rose to my lips. Edward, Richard, but the museum swallowed them like the tower once had. History prefers its mysteries unsolved. They sell better that way. I turned away. For an instant the reflection shifted, and 2 boys stood behind me, shadows linked hand in hand, watching, waiting. Then the light changed. And there was only me, another visitor drifting past, a story nobody could finish. Outside, London roared on, buses coughing, pigeons fighting over scraps, tourists laughing toward the gift shop. The city wore its ghosts casually, as jewelry, and me, I walked out with their names still burning in my mouth. The last proof that someone, once, had sworn not to abandon them. History had erased us, but the silence, if you leaned close enough, still carried our oath.